My name is Della Ashworth, and I am 36 years old. Last Thanksgiving, at exactly noon, I stood at the head of a converted grain warehouse in Millbrook, watching 280 people settle into their seats at the longest dinner table this town had ever built. Steam rose off the serving trays in slow curls toward the rafters. Someone's grandmother was laughing 3 tables down at a joke I hadn't heard, and for 1 full minute the room felt exactly the way I had spent 6 years trying to make a room feel. Then the loading dock door rolled up on its chain, groaning the way it always did in the cold, and the November light came in gray and flat behind 3 familiar shapes. My mother walked in first. My sister came in right behind her, phone already raised and recording, narrating under her breath like a woman auditioning for a documentary. A room full of easy laughter went quiet, table by table, the way a house of lights dims when someone finds the master switch. 6 years earlier, my family had left my Thanksgiving plate on the back steps of a rented banquet hall, wrapped in a garbage bag to keep off the rain, and called it a kindness. I had eaten alone in my car with the heater running and the radio off. Then I had driven out of Millbrook and out of their lives, and I had not looked back, not once, not really, though I would spend 6 years telling myself that I had. What my mother did that afternoon in front of 280 witnesses is the reason I am telling you this story at all. But there is something none of them knew when they walked through my door that day, something that had been sitting quietly in a desk drawer for years, and it is bigger than the building they were standing in. To understand the quiet that fell over that warehouse, you have to go back 6 years, to a rented studio above a dry cleaner on Fenwick Street, where the steam from the presses downstairs came up through the floorboards at night and left everything I owned smelling faintly of starch. I was 30 then, working banquet service at the Miller's Crossing event hall, 6 days a week, doubles whenever the schedule would let me, holidays without complaint because holidays paid time and a half, and time and a half was the only kind of math that mattered to me. I carried trays until my shoulders burned in a specific, familiar way, folded 1,200 napkins into swans for weddings I would never be invited to as a guest, and memorized the particular choreography of a room that needed to look effortless while 40 people sweated behind a curtain to make it so. People think of banquet work as carrying plates from one place to another. They don't think about the timing of it, the way a good server reads a room's mood before the room itself knows what it wants, the difference between a reception that feels warm and generous and one that feels, underneath all the flowers, like a transaction being processed. I was good at it. I loved it, in the stubborn, unfashionable way you sometimes love something that has never once loved you back. And folded into my wallet, behind a photograph of my grandmother, was an index card with a company name written on it in pencil, a business I meant to build one day, with my own name on the paperwork instead of someone else's, a plan I had never told a single living person about because saying it out loud felt like handing someone a knife. My mother, Vivian Ashworth, ran her house the way she ran her opinion of me, with a duster in one hand and a verdict in the other, always polishing something, always finding something underneath it that hadn't been polished enough. She had grown up the daughter of a rail yard dispatcher in the same town, and the girls at Millbrook Country Day had called her yard trash behind cupped hands for 3 straight years of her adolescence. She told that story at dinner parties like a scar she had earned in a war she was still quietly fighting, decades later, against an enemy that had long since forgotten her name. She married my father, Walt, an insurance adjuster with steady hours, a good pension, and a spine that had learned over 30 years to bend rather than argue. My sister Renata married into the Calloway family, who owned a regional linen and event supply business and a house with a circular driveway and a name that meant something at the country club my mother had once been denied entry to as a girl. Renata was the good news, the proof that 30 years of scrubbing had worked. I was the weather everyone endured, apologized for quietly, and hoped would pass before company arrived. 2 days before that Thanksgiving, my mother called while I was polishing 140 water goblets in the Miller's Crossing kitchen, my hands pruned from the sink, my phone wedged against my shoulder. Dinner would be at their new house on Larkspur Court, she said, hosted by Renata this year. A proper sit-down, adults at the main table, nothing like the paper plate business we used to do. Then, before hanging up, she added the line she always saved for last. the one she had been saying to me in some form since I was 14 years old. Please don't come in looking like you just walked off a shift.
She didn't say goodbye.
Women like my mother never do. They leave you holding the tone instead, turning it over in your hands long after the call has ended, looking for the part that was supposed to be love. I should have paid closer attention to the seating chart Renata mentioned in passing that Sunday, the one with place cards ordered from a stationery shop in the city for a family dinner of 9 people who all shared, at minimum, a last name. My father looked up from the newspaper when Renata announced it at the kitchen counter, looked at the card stock samples fanned out like a hand of cards, and looked back down without a word. That was the whole of his objection as far as I ever knew, and I let it go, the way I let most things go in that house, because letting things go was the oldest and steadiest job I had ever held in that family, older even than the one at Miller's Crossing, and paid considerably less. On Thanksgiving morning, the banquet hall's other holiday server, a woman named Priya, who had been splitting the shift with me so neither of us worked the whole day alone, got a call before 9 that her mother had been hospitalized 2 states away, and she left in tears, apologizing the whole way to her car. That left me alone with 110 place settings for a corporate brunch that ran 40 minutes past schedule because the client's CEO wanted a toast nobody had planned for, glassware still needing polishing, and a noon deadline I had built my entire day around like scaffolding. I texted my mother at 11:15. Running behind. Shift emergency. Save me a seat. Be there as fast as I can. The message showed as read almost instantly, the little word appearing under the bubble like a small, cold fact. No reply came. I told myself, the way you tell yourself things you need to be true, that she was carving the turkey, that her hands were full, that silence didn't always mean what it looked like it meant. I clocked out at 1:30, still in my black and white uniform, my hair flattened under a hairnet I had forgotten to remove until I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, smelling faintly of silver polish and warm gravy from the brunch. I had a choice standing in that parking lot with my keys in my hand. Drive home first, shower, change into the sweater I had ironed the night before and arrive very late, or drive straight to Larkspur Court and arrive only somewhat late. I chose the second because I believed, wrongly and with my whole chest, that my family measured people by the clock and not by the collar. I drove across town with the windows cracked to air out the smell of the shift, rehearsing an apology at every red light, the same 3 sentences rearranged a dozen different ways. When I turned onto Larkspur Court, every car was already lined up along the curb and driveway, Renata's SUV gleaming under the streetlight, my aunt's sedan, my uncle's truck still wearing the dealer plates my father had helped him negotiate down. The dining room window glowed gold through the curtains. I saw one curtain twitch and fall still, the particular, unhurried way a curtain moves when someone lets go of it fast, hoping you didn't see. I parked at the curb and walked up the front path holding the garment bag with my good sweater in it out of pure habit, though there was no longer time to change into anything. The front door was locked. I rang the bell and heard the chime carry through the walls of a house I'd grown up half visiting, half cleaning, heard chairs, heard laughter, heard the specific clink of good silverware against good china, and heard no one move toward the door. I rang again. Nothing. Then I looked down. On the top step, centered as though staged for a photograph, sat a paper plate covered tightly in foil, my name written across the top in thick black marker, all capital letters, with a long, careful, curling tail on the final A. Under the foil, turkey sliced thin, stuffing, green beans laid out in neat parallel rows like they'd been arranged with a ruler, a dinner roll with a pat of butter already stiffening in the cold November air. Whoever had made that plate had taken real, deliberate care with it. That was the part that hollowed me out standing on that step, more than the locked door itself. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. A text from my mother, and I can still see the exact shape of it on the screen. We kept a plate warm for you outside. Didn't want the smell of the shift coming in on the good tablecloth. I looked through the narrow gap in the dining room curtains because I could not help myself, the way you can't help pressing on a bruise. 9 place cards, small white tents standing in front of 9 chairs. 9 people seated and eating, warm, laughing, unbothered. There had never been a 10th chair at that table. Whatever I had been to this family that morning, The table had been telling the truth about it long before the turkey had even gone into the oven. I picked up the plate with both hands, the foil crinkling, walked back down the path to my car, and drove to the end of the street, where I parked under an old maple whose bare branches scraped softly against a streetlight, because I did not trust myself behind the wheel and did not want them watching me sit there and fall apart. I peeled back the foil and balanced the plate on my knees, and I managed 3 bites before I stopped, fork suspended halfway to my mouth. The turkey was still warm, and somehow that made it worse, a warm meal made by careful hands that would not, in the end, open a door. A woman walking her small dog 2 houses down slowed, tapped gently on my passenger window, looked at the plate on my lap, looked back up the street at the glowing gold window, and asked, gently, whether that was my dinner. Just heading out, I told her, in the smile you learn early in service work, the one that keeps tips coming and questions away. She lingered a second longer than politeness required, her eyes doing something I didn't understand until years later. She was memorizing it, and then she nodded once and walked on with her dog trotting ahead of her into the cold. For 3 days after that, my phone stayed completely silent, which told me everything I needed to know about how the conversation at that table had gone once I'd driven away. Nobody called to ask where I had gone. Nobody called at all. On Sunday night, sitting on the edge of my bed with the dry cleaning presses humming faintly through the floor, I typed out 2 full screens explaining the double shift, Priya's emergency, the garment bag still hanging untouched in my back seat, what it does to a person to see her own name written so carefully in marker on a plate left outside like she was something to be fed politely and kept at a distance. I read it back twice. Then I deleted the whole thing because explaining yourself to people who lock the door on you is just knocking with extra steps. I typed 1 line instead. I got the message. I won't come to the table again. I sent it to my mother, and then I began blocking numbers one by one, working through the family like a checklist. My mother, my aunt, the cousins who had passed the gravy at that table, until my thumb hovered over my father's name and stopped. I never blocked him. I couldn't have told you why, not then, and not for years after. I moved to the city of Ashford the following week with $1,900 saved from 3 years of tips and a security deposit refund. All of it counted twice into a coffee can before I drove it 200 miles in the passenger seat like cargo that mattered more than anything else I owned. I rented a room by the month in a house full of graduate students who kept strange hours and asked no questions, took an overnight shift managing linens and event setup for a downtown hotel, and learned the entire city by its loading docks and its empty parking garages at 3 a.m. I kept one thing from Millbrook besides the memory itself. The plate, washed carefully, dried flat under a stack of textbooks so it wouldn't warp, and slid into a manila envelope like a piece of evidence in a case I hadn't yet decided to bring. My roommates assumed it was a ticket stub from some concert I'd loved. I let them think it. Some people keep photographs to remember the good days. I kept a paper plate to make sure I never negotiated with the bad ones. My cousin Nadia, the only person in that family who had ever sat with me at gatherings without flinching, without glancing sideways to see who was watching her do it, called that January with what she carefully called the version they're telling people. In it, I had arrived hours late, refused outright to come inside, snatched the plate they had lovingly prepared for me, and stormed off in a fit of shame over my job and jealousy of Renata's new house and her new husband's money. There had been no storming anywhere, only a locked storm door and a single text message I could have had framed and hung in a courtroom. Not one relative had called to check that story against the actual person it was supposedly about. A comfortable lie beats an uncomfortable question at every family table in America, and mine was no exception. Nadia asked if I wanted her to set the record straight with anyone. I surprised myself with how fast the answer came out of me. No, I said. Let them keep the story. I'll keep the receipts of my own life. She laughed, the particular laugh you use when something isn't funny but the alternative is somehow worse, and told me I sounded exactly like my grandmother. It remains the highest compliment I have ever been paid. That same week I opened a blank notes file on my phone and wrote a single line at the top, the only business plan I had for a long time. Build something that doesn't need them. 6 years, it turned out, was exactly long enough. Year 1 was me, A rented cargo van with a check engine light I couldn't afford to fix, and a folding table I set up in a church parking lot every Saturday morning selling holiday meal kits to people working the same doubles I had once worked myself. I undercut no one and out-detailed everyone, because the hotel had taught me hospital corners and a decade of banquet work had taught me the rules nobody bothers to write down. The difference between food that is merely served and food that is served with the kind of attention that makes a stranger feel, for one meal, like somebody's guest instead of somebody's customer. I spent my grocery money on a food safety certification course at the community college and sat in the front row in my work polo among students half my age, and I treated every one of them as competition because they genuinely were. My first private catering client, a small law office throwing a holiday party for 11 people, paid me with a check made out to Della Ashworth, my actual name, spelled correctly. I photocopied it before I cashed it and taped the copy to my bathroom mirror beside the torn scrap of notebook paper that read Harvest Table, the name I had finally chosen, so it would be the first thing I saw every morning and the last thing I saw every night. The real turn came at a hospital where I had picked up occasional catering work for staff appreciation lunches on the overnight kitchen's slow nights. The facilities director there, a retired ICU nurse named Odessa Marsh with reading glasses permanently pushed up into gray hair, stayed late one evening and watched me break down an entire buffet line by myself, sanitizing underneath the chafing dishes where nobody would ever check, rotating stock 2 days ahead of any expiration date, wiping down the legs of the folding tables. She asked why I bothered with a job nobody would inspect. Because germs don't check what supervisors check, I told her and meant it. She started laughing, then stopped abruptly and looked around the room like she was seeing it for the first time in years. The catering company the hospital had under contract was large, cheap, and sloppy, and she had been quietly unhappy with them for 2 full years without saying so to anyone who could change it. She didn't offer me anything that night, but she began leaving handwritten notes on the front desk after my shifts, short at first, then longer, until one of them was a question instead of a compliment. What would you charge to take over this whole department yourself? I named a number that was fair instead of desperate, which took every ounce of nerve I had built up over 3 years of counting coffee cans. Odessa said yes before I had even finished the sentence. Then she told me the thing that changed my life more than the number did. Get yourself an LLC and real insurance, she said, because I'd rather pay a company than a person, and you should be a company, not just a very reliable woman with a van. 6 weeks later, I stood in a strip mall print shop holding the first page of Harvest Table Catering and Events Incorporation papers, my own name typed cleanly on the line where names go, and I carried it to my car like something newborn and fragile. In the driver's seat, where nobody could see me, I came apart completely. Ugly, heaving, grateful, forehead against the steering wheel. The whole performance. The last time I had sat in a parked car with something that mattered resting in my lap, it had been a plate of cold turkey wrapped in foil. This time it was a business with my name on it, filed real, notarized. I let myself have 10 full minutes of that, and then I fixed my face in the visor mirror, because I had a client walk through at 4 o'clock and grief, however earned, does not get to run the schedule. That same week held one more envelope I almost missed entirely, a fat business envelope forwarded from my old Fenwick Street address, a past due notice from a bank on a home equity loan, my parents' names printed neatly at the top, the payment amount sitting in bold type that I recognized before I had even finished reading it, because for 3 years an identical sum had left my own account on the first of every month. Wired quietly to my mother under a name she gave it that let both of us avoid the real one. Help with your father's medication costs. I had believed that fiction because believing it let me keep sending the money without asking what it truly covered. The payments had stopped, without any decision on my part, the week I left Millbrook. Not a strategy. I had simply moved and no one had called, and money you hand to people who lock a door in your face has a name, and the name is a donation. I filed the notice in a drawer that same night and sent nothing after it, and I sat for a long while waiting to feel guilty, and what came instead was something colder and steadier, like tile under bare feet at dawn. By year 3, Harvest Table employed 6 people, and I hired them the way I had always wished someone had once hired me, on the strength of what they'd survived, not just what they'd already proven. I brought on a single mother named Rosa, who'd been let go from a chain catering company for missing one shift when her son had strep throat, and a 60-year-old veteran named Dale, who ironed his own shirt to interview for a job breaking down folding chairs. I paid a wage that made my accountant sigh audibly, because I had done this work my whole life and knew exactly what it cost a body to do it well. I set exactly one company rule that had nothing to do with food safety, and I set it on Rosa's first day, after I caught her eating a sandwich standing up over the break room sink like she was apologizing for taking the time to eat at all. Nobody eats standing up, not on my clock. Every harvest table site got a real break table with real chairs, and lunch happened sitting down. Every shift, no exceptions. I never explained the rule to anyone. Explaining it would have meant telling them about a step in Millbrook, and back then I still kept that plate folded away in an envelope like a classified file nobody was cleared to read. My cousin Nadia kept a line open to Millbrook whether I asked her to or not, calling while folding her own laundry, giving me the town like a weather report I hadn't subscribed to but couldn't quite cancel. Renata and her husband Grant had taken over Grant's family's regional linen and event supply business, Callaway Provisions, and had built it, in Nadia's telling, into something they photographed constantly and managed rather poorly underneath the photographs. My name never came up at any family gathering, except once in year 4, when Nadia told me flatly, and without softening it, what my mother said whenever anyone asked what had become of me. "She tells people you wait tables somewhere in the city," Nadia said. She says it like a warning, like a bedtime story about what happens to girls who don't listen. I looked at the dish towel in my hands, folded it in thirds, and set it on the stack.
"She's not wrong," I said.
"I do wait tables. I own the company they belong to." Nadia laughed the way you laugh when the alternative is worse, and then she told me the rest, that my father had stopped meeting his old co-workers for coffee, that my niece June was getting tall, that the house on Larkspur Court needed paint it wasn't getting. Year 4 very nearly broke us entirely. A regional hospital group that made up a third of our revenue by then began paying at 60 days instead of 30, then 90, then in promises instead of money. I had 14 people on payroll by that point, and I would skip my own pay before I let anyone on my crew miss an hour of theirs, which is an easy thing to say, and a genuinely difficult thing to do the same month your own rent is due. I sat one night at my kitchen table with a predatory short-term loan agreement the internet had assured me was standard practice, interest that should have required a warning label, pen already in my hand, signature line waiting. Then the phone rang. A Millbrook area code I didn't recognize, and every muscle in my body turned to rebar, because for 6 years I had quietly assumed that if news ever came from that town, it would be about my father. It wasn't. It was a nurse calling on behalf of a Mrs. Loyola Fenn, 2 doors down from my parents' old house on Larkspur Court, admitted overnight for observation, who had badgered the hospital staff into tracking me down through Nadia because she had something to say and did not intend to die without saying it, although she also had no plans to die that particular week. "You're the girl who ate her dinner in the car," she said, without any hello at all. "I send you a card every Christmas and you sign it back like, I don't know exactly who it's from. I know who you are, honey." I never forgot what I saw on those steps. I just wanted you to know somebody saw it. I sat there with a criminal interest rate in front of me and an 80-year-old witness in my ear, and I put the pen down. The next morning I called the hospital group's operations director and renegotiated the contract like a woman with absolutely nothing to apologize for. They blinked first. We stayed. The year after that payroll scare, I stopped waiting for business to find us and went looking for it instead. A regional clinic network's facilities director, a formidable retired hospital administrator named Pat Osei, with a reputation for eating vendors alive at contract renewal time, skipped the glossy folders 3 competitors had prepared for her and asked instead for a live, unannounced walkthrough. One supervisor from each bidder, 1 hour, narrating everything they saw in a working clinic. I heard afterward that one competitor had spent his entire hour talking about the size of his delivery fleet, and another had simply quoted prices off a laminated card. I walked Pat through her own building and showed her exactly what her current vendor had been missing: the underside of the reception counter where hands actually landed all day, the door handle on the sterilization room, a supply closet whose inventory sheet hadn't matched its shelves since spring. At the end, she asked me exactly one question: where had I trained? Banquet halls, I told her, the answer I had stopped being ashamed of sometime around year 2. 6 years, best cold chain discipline you'll find in this state.
They just never called it that.
We won all 9 of her clinics. I heard later that the glossiest of my competitors had told her board, in his final pitch, that harvest table was run by a party girl playing businesswoman. Pat had reportedly told him she'd take the party girl over the salesman in any building where people's actual health was on the line. I sent her a fruit basket that Christmas. She sent it back with a note that said, simply, spend it on your people. We have renewed with each other 3 times since. The week we finally signed the lease on Harvest Table's first real warehouse office off Route 9, I unpacked the last box that had followed me through 4 separate moves, and at the very bottom of it, under the tax folders, sat the manila envelope. I hadn't opened it in 7 years. I slid the paper plate out onto my new desk and sat down slowly in my new chair. It had gone soft at the edges the way paper does, and the foil was long gone, but the marker had only faded, never surrendered. Della, all capital letters, careful spacing, that long curling tail on the final A. I took it to a frame shop on Denton Road, and the young clerk behind the counter treated it like I'd walked in carrying a genuine piece of art, gloves and all, no questions asked, which is how I learned that frame shops must see absolutely everything come through their doors. It went up on the wall behind my desk, and underneath it, on a small brass plaque I paid entirely too much for, one line, reserved seating. And that same afternoon, for the first time in 7 years, I finally looked at the handwriting itself instead of the hurt it carried. The big round letters, the careful spacing, the way the writer had clearly finished each stroke gently, deliberately, like someone being careful with something breakable. My mother's handwriting is tight, slanted, hurried, the handwriting of someone always moving on to the next thing. This was not her hand. Standing at that counter, I finally let myself ask the question the steps had never answered. If she didn't write my name, who did? The long table began entirely by accident in year 5, on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I was walking the warehouse floor at closing and found our newest hire, a 19-year-old named Marcus, signing up for a holiday monitoring shift we barely even needed. I asked him why. He shrugged and said there was no real point sitting alone in an empty apartment when he could pick up holiday pay instead. And there it was, the whole porch standing in front of me in a Harvest Table polo shirt. I canceled the monitoring shift on the spot. By 6 the next morning I had ordered folding tables, and by Thursday noon our warehouse smelled like 14 turkeys and 30 people were eating at one long line of tables pushed end to end. My crew, their kids, Rose's mother, Dale, wearing an actual tie. I stood up to say something and managed exactly 1 sentence before my throat closed entirely. Everyone eats on real plates here, and everyone gets a chair. They thought it was a toast. It was a policy. The next year we fed 120. By year 7 we were planning for 280 seniors bussed in from the Cordell Street Towers, night shift workers with nowhere else to be, college students who couldn't afford the trip home, anyone whose holiday had an empty chair where a family should have been sitting instead. We rented real china for all 280 settings. I paid the deposit personally, and I would have paid it twice over. There is exactly 1 rule printed on a banner over the door, and by now our whole crew can recite it without being asked. No paper plates, not one, not ever. 2 weeks before that Thanksgiving, my procurement manager forwarded me a vendor bid for the long tables linen and disposable supply order, flagged with a short note that read, "This one's laying it on thick. Wanted you to see yourself." The letterhead read Callaway Provisions, my brother-in-law Grant's company, the cover letter buttered generously on both sides, addressed at the bottom to D. Ashworth, a stranger's initials on a contract he badly needed, because that was exactly what I still was to him. Renata handled Callaway's paperwork, Nadia had told me once, but this particular bid had clearly gone out under Grant's own hand, through some general vendor portal, one of dozens of Hail Marys from a company one search told me needed the business badly. I sat back and let myself feel the full size of that for a moment. For 7 years, Millbrook had been a place that simply happened to me at a distance, without my consent. Now it was mailing me bids. I did not reject Grant's bid because he was my brother-in-law. I ran Callaway Provisions through the same due diligence I ran every vendor through, on paper, on record, on references, the way Harvest Table itself had once been vetted by clinics that had every right to say no to me. It wasn't close. 2 supplier judgments sitting on the county docket, a food safety citation from the spring corrected embarrassingly late, reviews from school district accounts describing shorted orders and quietly swapped brands, and a wage claim from a former driver, already settled, with a second one now pending. That last item ended it twice over, because I have never once trusted a company that doesn't pay the people who carry things for it. I called Nadia that night for the ground truth, and she gave it to me plainly. Grant had been robbing the delivery schedule to cover interest payments. Renata had been telling everyone the business was expanding. My mother was telling church they were doing wonderfully. Then Nadia paused and sent me a photo of the Gazette's legal notices page, the small gray column nobody reads until their own name appears in it. Third notice down, a pre-foreclosure filing on the property at Larkspur Court, my parents' house, the house with the front steps, 90 days from a sheriff sale, listed neatly between a storage unit auction and somebody's dissolved LLC. I wrote the rejection letter myself instead of leaving it entirely to procurement, 3 short factual paragraphs about selection criteria and compliance history, nothing personal anywhere in it except the signature block. For 7 years, I had signed every outgoing Harvest Table document as D. Ashworth, a habit I had told myself was branding and had always known, somewhere underneath, was a hiding place. I typed out my full name for the first time on anything that would leave the building. Della Ashworth, founder and CEO, Harvest Table Catering and Events. I hit send at 4 o'clock. At 4:02 it bounced, Grant's inbox entirely full, a detail that told me everything I needed to know about the state of Callaway Provisions, and my assistant automatically resent it to the company's general contact address. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? It wasn't until Nadia's goodnight text that the true shape of it landed on me, sitting up straight in bed at 11 at night. She asked how the vendor decision had gone, and I told her, and she went quiet for a full minute before sending one line that undid me completely. Della. The general inbox is Renata's. Somewhere in Millbrook, sitting unread in my own sister's queue, was a letter with my full legal name signed at the bottom of a rejection. The fuse was lit, and nobody had noticed it yet. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, a local news crew came through to film long table preparations for the evening broadcast, steam trays, volunteers, Dale directing table placement like a man running a small military operation, and I stayed carefully behind the camera line with a clipboard, where founders belong. But television crews are in the business of finding the one person everyone else keeps glancing at, and while I was walking Rosa through the seating chart for the senior buses, the camera drifted. That evening at 6:11 p.m., 5 full seconds of my face went out across the entire region above a banner reading local caterer says no one eats alone at her table. 5 seconds after 7 years. 50 minutes south, in a pediatric orthopedic clinic waiting room, my niece June was having a sprained ankle looked at after volleyball tournament, and the waiting room television happened to be tuned to that broadcast. June told Nadia afterward, in more detail than any reporter could have managed, that her mother stopped mid-sentence, stood up, and walked to the television, and would not sit back down no matter how gently the nurse asked her to. Renata typed the entire drive home, at every red light and every stop sign, and what she typed landed in the family group chat at 7:40 that night. Nadia, still silently in that chat after all these years, sent me the screenshots in real time, so I watched my own resurrection unfold like a live broadcast. A photo of the television screen, my face pixelated under the chiron, then in all capital letters, guys, look who I found, then 3 messages falling like dominoes. She owns Harvest Table, that huge catering company. The long table thing on the news is hers. Then nothing at all for 9 full minutes. My aunt broke the silence, first, with a single question mark. Then my mother, and I want you to sit with the fact that after 7 full years of silence, this was her opening statement, screenshot preserved exactly. Is that our Della?
R.
From the woman who had once written "You're not clean enough" for the table. 89 missed calls came in over the next hour and a half, from 14 different numbers, people who for 7 years had known precisely how to reach me and had chosen, every single day, not to. I let my phone ring on a shipping crate while Dale, and I taped floor plans to the loading dock wall for the next day's setup. At midnight, I finally turned it over and played only the first voicemail because you should always read the cover letter. My mother's voice came out syrup warm, pitched up into her church register, a register I hadn't heard aimed at me since before I ever wore a uniform. "Sweetheart, it's Mom. We saw you on the news, honey. We are so proud. We've been looking for you everywhere. Call your mother back." Looking for me everywhere. I had lived 50 minutes down a state highway with my company's name filed in the public business registry the entire time. I deleted the voicemail, plugged in the phone, and went to bed, and sleep came easily, the way it always does once the receipts finally start arriving in real time. Wednesday afternoon, the family sent a scout. I was signing off produced deliveries at the dock when Rosa radioed up that a woman out front was asking for the owner. No appointment, wouldn't give a name, said only that she was family. I knew before I even rounded the corner. My aunt stood in the lobby in her Goodwill coat, holding her purse with both hands the way you'd hold a covered dish. She opened with the weather, moved to my health, and then, with the elegance of a dump truck, arrived at her actual cargo. "Your parents are going through something just awful with the house, sweetheart. And Thanksgiving would mean the world. Family is family, Della, at the end of the day." I let her finish completely. Then I did the thing I had promised myself in a parked car under a maple tree 7 years earlier, and it turns out a boundary delivered at ordinary conversation volume is the loudest thing you can install in a lobby. "I'm glad you came," I told her, and handed her a flyer from the front desk. "Doors open at noon tomorrow. Everyone gets a chair, and everyone's welcome, including all of you. But there's no private meeting before it, and there's no conversation about the house. Not tomorrow, not ever." She left holding that flyer like she wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. Thanksgiving morning, a profile of Harvest Table ran on the front of the Ashford Papers feature section under the headline "The Founder Who Frames a Paper Plate," exactly as I had asked. Not my face first, but the wall behind my desk, the softened plate with my name in fading marker, the brass plaque, and me standing beside it, arms crossed, not smiling and not sorry. By 11 the warehouse held everything I had spent 7 years building: steam and cider, someone's child playing an upright piano we'd rolled in from a church down the road, senior buses unloading at the dock, Mrs. Fenn installed at the head table with her cane and her new dog's successor at her feet, exactly as she had been every year since her hospital call had once stopped me from signing something I'd have regretted. At 11:50, the noise at the door changed, spreading table by table until the whole room fell still. My mother entered first in her church coat, arms already opening wide for an audience she hadn't yet earned back. My father followed with his hat in both hands. Renata came in filming, narrating softly. Grant peeled off almost immediately toward the sponsor tables to work the room like a trade show floor. My niece June hung back by the coat rack, 13 years old and clearly mortified, the only one who had walked in with clean hands. My mother reached me holding out a pumpkin pie, like a flag of truce. "We found you, honey. A fresh start for all of us." 280 people watched me look at that pie. Then a chair scraped back, unhurried, at the head table, and Mrs. Fenn rose slowly on her cane. "I remember you, Vivian," she said, in the clear, carrying voice of a woman who had taught Sunday school for 40 years and buried every fear she'd ever owned. "I remember a plate on a step. I was there." My mother's smile stayed exactly where it was while everything behind it began quietly packing to leave. I lifted the framed plate off its hook near the serving station, where I had moved it that very morning, and set it down flat on the head table in front of all of them, glass side up. My father looked down at the handwriting and could not look away, and I watched his shoulders come down off their hooks in real time. "The plate was your idea, Dad," I said quietly, just for a small circle, though the room had gone so still it hardly mattered. "You just wrote the name, didn't you?" Renata answered before she could stop herself, mid-live stream, with a short, scoffing laugh of a woman correcting a small detail before she realizes what she's revealing. "Dad wrote it because Mom told him to." My father's voice, when it finally came, was sanded down to almost nothing at all. "Your mother said if I let you come in smelling like the hall, she'd have to eat out on the porch too." I wrote your name nice. It was all I could think to do for you that day. I did not raise my voice. 7 years of running rooms had taught me that quiet, laid out plainly like a checklist, carries further than shouting ever could. I inventoried it for the room, the double shift, the tech scene at 11:15 and never once answered, the locked storm door, 9 place cards on a table I had been explicitly told to come to, the message about the porch that I could still recite from memory, and finally the years of money that had quietly carried their mortgage until the month I left, money that stopped the same week nobody called to ask why, and a foreclosure notice sitting now in the public record for anyone in Millbrook to read. My mother's church register cracked first, and then everything beneath it came apart at once. She slammed the pie dish down hard enough to crack it, and 30 years of managed appearances came off her altogether, and she told the entire room what she'd sacrificed and what I owed her, and finally, reaching for the oldest weapon she owned, swept her arm across my staff and my china and my 280 guests and said, "You think these people respect you? Look at you. You wait tables." The silence that followed had a texture to it, and into that silence came a sound I will hear on my own deathbed and still smile at. Chairs, one after another, scraping back all around the room. My crew, standing. Rosa standing. Dale standing at attention like a flag was passing. 120 people, every one of whom had waited tables or bussed floors or cleaned rooms at some point in their lives, rising together without a single word, just standing, the way you stand for something you've decided matters more than comfort. My mother turned in a slow circle inside that quiet forest of standing people and could not find a single face left in that room that was buying what she was selling. They left the way storms leave, loud, and then suddenly, entirely gone, out through the dock doors, my mother first, my sister a few seconds behind her, still holding her phone though there was no longer any version of that footage that helped her. My father did not go with them. He set his hat under his chair like a man arriving at church, sat down at the nearest open place setting, and stayed the entire afternoon, passing rolls when they came to him, thanking every volunteer by name, eating everything on his plate the way a man does when he is quietly doing penance one bite at a time. June crossed the room on her own, found me by the serving line, and asked in the smallest voice imaginable if she could sit with me instead. 7 years, and someone in that family had finally said my name like it genuinely belonged to her. The house on Larkspur Court went to auction the following spring. I did not stop it and I did not catch it either, and I have made my peace with both of those facts. My parents moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on Miller Street. My father's handwritten thank you note arrived that December, and it sits now in my desk drawer beside an older and signed card that once arrived with a bouquet of grocery store flowers in the same careful, slanted, deliberately gentle hand that read, "Only proud of you." I have never thrown either one away, which I've come to understand is its own kind of answer, even if I haven't fully answered him back yet. My attorney drew up an education trust in June's name that spring, untouchable by any adult in the family, funded quietly with no announcement and no leverage attached to it for anyone. June volunteers at the long table every single Saturday now, badge and all, the youngest name on our entire roster, and it was completely her own idea. Here is the one thing I know now, standing in my own warehouse with my own name on the door, that I did not know sitting in a parked car 7 years ago, with cold turkey balanced on a steering wheel. Family isn't the people who happen to share your name. It's the people who make absolutely sure you never eat alone. And the cleanest thing I have ever done in my whole life was walk away from a table that only had room in it for my shame and build a longer one instead, with enough chairs for every person who has ever needed one.